Welcome into press coverage. Dan Hope joined by Chase Brown on a surprising day of news at Ohio State as Tony Alford is not only leaving Ohio State's coaching staff, but is leaving to join the team up north, Ohio State's arch rival, as Michigan is hiring Tony Alford as its new running backs coach to replace Mike Hart. Certainly not something that we would have expected when we woke up on Wednesday morning. Particularly considering that Ohio State has already started spring practice.
Right, and that Ohio State has arguably the best running back room in America with TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Guys like that, why would you want to leave a running back room like that? And, we had that message come into our Slack channel earlier this morning, and everyone was kind of like, is this right? Like, we all kind of had that look of disbelief, all kind of like read that report, and we're like, maybe we should look into this more. But also, that doesn't seem like it would even be a possibility for an Ohio State coach to leave for Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, it's not totally unprecedented. You think back to when Ryan Day first joined Ohio State's coaching staff or first became Ohio State's head coach back in 2019. He hired Greg Madison and Al Washington away from Michigan. So we have seen cross rivalry coaching moves before. It's certainly always shocking when you see something like this happen. But, I think there were some signs that Tony Alford's time at Ohio State could be nearing its end. You think back to a few weeks ago when James Laurinaitis was hired as Ohio State's linebackers coach. Ohio State announced contract extensions for several other assistant coaches. Tony Alford was not one of them, and Tony Alford's contract was set to expire at the end of his past season. And so, especially with Chip Kelly coming in and with Chip expected to have a say in how Ohio State is going to construct its offensive coaching staff going forward, I felt like there was a possibility that, this might be Tony Alford's last year at Ohio State, but I certainly didn't expect that after a week of spring practice. I mean, we were just there at practice last week. He was coaching the running backs. Now, when Ohio State returns to the practice field next week, they're not going to have a running backs coach unless they hire one quickly. And that's certainly something that you would expect Ohio State is going to move quickly to try to do. But sometimes in a situation like this, you'd maybe expect that Ohio State would, promote from within. There's not really an obvious candidate to do that for Ohio State right now. And so it's probably more likely Ohio State is going to have to open up a search here and look for a running backs coach from elsewhere.
Yeah, and we had talked a little bit about how last week Ohio State, had a couple of spring practices, and it seemed like Ryan Day was working a little bit more intently and had a little bit more work with the running backs than he usually did. And I think when we saw that, we kind of just chalked it up to, he's the head coach and he wanted to take a more CEO-like approach to this season. And, maybe he wouldn't work with the quarterbacks as much having Chip Kelly around. But now that picture starts to become just a little bit clearer for us now, knowing that maybe there was some conversations back and forth between him and Alford in the weeks leading up to spring football that, maybe he would explore other options. And so there is sort of that give and take there with Ryan Day being able to help out maybe with the running backs on an interim basis. But still, he does want to have that CEO-like approach. So I'm curious to see how involved he will get with that room until a replacement is found in the full-time nature, in a full-time capacity.
Yeah, at the time, and you had mentioned it to me, but hey, Ryan seems to be working a lot with the running backs, and I didn't really read into it at the time because we're at those practices. You see it, sometimes, Tim Walton will be working with the linebackers, and, you see a lot of different coaches working with different position groups when they're going through their individual drills. So I didn't really make much of it. I'm just like, oh, Ryan's just moving around working with different groups. But he did seem to be working with the running backs more than he was working with any other position group that wasn't the quarterbacks. And so this maybe kind of colors that in a little bit more and explains that a little bit more. Not that I think Ohio State was expecting at this time last week that Tony Alford would go to Michigan, because if they had been expecting that, Tony Alford would not have been in the building. I mean, you think about what just happened with Michigan over the last few years with Connor Stallions. I'm sure Ohio State is not thrilled that it just went through its first week of spring practice with somebody who is now a Michigan assistant coach in the building, watching the team practice. Now he's going to be able to bring all that information up to Ann Arbor, and Ohio State is going to have to be aware of what information he might bring there. But that's part of a business. I mean, I've talked about it before. I don't think we're that far off from the time where we're going to see an Ohio State player transfer to Michigan, because that's just where we are in terms of the transfer portal world. We already saw a Michigan player transfer to Ohio State earlier this offseason, Joey Velasquez, walk-on linebacker from Columbus, so not as shocking as most cross rivalry transfers would be, but still, it's always something that's going to take you back when you see a move between these two programs that hate each other so much, and you think about how pivotal this season is for Ohio State, how important it is for Ohio State to get back on top in this rivalry. And we've seen Ohio State make a lot of power moves this offseason, I think very much in response to how last season ended, whether that be hiring Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator, whether that be bringing in Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins from the transfer portal. That's the other part that makes this crazy, is Tony Alford is leaving a running back room that's expected to be the best in the country this year with TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. But, my understanding is that, maybe Tony didn't necessarily see eye to eye with Ryan Day on everything. And so maybe he was looking around at his options, and Michigan came in with a big offer to lure him to Ann Arbor. And, that's kind of a response. You see Ohio State make these power moves. Now Michigan makes a power move. Sharon Moore, who had already decided not to retain Mike Hart for his coaching staff, now poaching from his biggest rival to get his new running backs coach.
Right. And that's two different sort of timing things that you had mentioned. One being that Ohio State probably wasn't expecting this move to occur, given that Alford was on the coaching staff at the start of spring practice. I was even thinking, right now it's spring break. Uh, Are TreVeyon Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, are any of those running backs even on campus? Like, what does Alford's exit look like right now? Do you think he even had an in-person meeting with them? Like, are they even around to have that conversation? That exit plan seems a little bit unexpected, or adds to the unexpected nature of this exit. And the same thing with, as you're bringing up with Michigan, they're making a lot of power moves right now in response to the ones that Ohio State made this offseason. And with Alford going to Michigan, I think why this one's a little bit more unexpected than some of the moves that you brought up with Washington, with Madison in the past, is how much of an emphasis Ohio State's players made when they decided to come back, or transfers that were coming into the program made, on beating Michigan. So much of it is about the gold pants. It's about beating Michigan. It's about having a legacy in that regard. And so with all of that narrative coming in for those players, and even, the coaches are all talking about, that's the goal. We need, beat Michigan, win a Big Ten championship, win a national championship. They talk about that all the time. But there is a special emphasis on beating Michigan this year out of all years. And so to see Alford leaving, not only just leaving the program, but leaving for Michigan, I think is just what adds to kind of the unexpected nature of it too. It's the timing, but it's also just where he's going is so out of left field, it seems. But then again, as you bring up, it's not. It's the fact that Michigan is making these moves, and Michigan's going to offer him considerable more money to coach the running backs position, maybe have a promotion or a different change of title in there. So yeah, I'm not sure how the overall response to such a move will be. It seems that most Ohio State fans are going to go the route that it's negative, but I'm curious how this will look 48 hours, 72 hours from now, once people get that initial reaction out of the way.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty negative in Columbus. I think even you saw before we started recording here, even on Wednesday, that players were starting to chime in on social media, and they seemed pretty unhappy about the news. So, like you said, I mean, I would assume it hit them out of left field. Like you said, they're not even on campus this week, and so I think certainly a shocker to everyone, in the program. And this is a guy who's had opportunities to leave before, and he had chosen to stay at Ohio State before. So it's certainly interesting and surprising that it turned out to be an offer from the arch rival that gets him to leave Ohio State after 9 years. But, it's something that we've seen it already once this offseason that Ryan Day has had to respond when he's lost a coach unexpectedly, that being Bill O'Brien leaving to become the head coach at Boston College and replacing him with Chip Kelly. We both agree that we think Ohio State hit a home run on that move by replacing Bill O'Brien with somebody who may be an even better fit than Chip Kelly. So now you're Ryan Day, you got to respond again. Can you go get an elite running backs coach to replace Tony Alford? And it's a little too early to say who that would be. I mean, I think we both kind of had the same idea. Like, who would your first call be? Mine would be to Eddie George. I mean, that would be. If you think of him being the head coach at Tennessee State, he's got that coaching experience. He is, royalty at Ohio State, right up there, right behind Archie as the best running back to ever come through Ohio State. So, that would be, A1 on the list for me. But you have to figure that, if Eddie's not interested, there's going to be plenty of coaches who are interested because this is Ohio State and because you get to come in and coach TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins.
Right. And you get the tutelage of not only Ryan Day, but Chip Kelly. Like, you become a part of two different coaching trees. One that's only been coaching at Ohio State for a few seasons now, but one also in Chip Kelly, who's been at Oregon, who's been in the NFL, who's been at UCLA. To be able to work with those two offensive minds, that's a resume builder. So you're right. If Eddie George doesn't want to take the opportunity, which is completely within his rights, he's running his own program down at Tennessee State. But there will be a lot of people swinging for the fences and trying to get this job because of how much it offers, not only from a talent perspective, but just from being in a room with so many talented offensive minds that Ohio State has.
Well, this certainly made spring football more interesting, and we will certainly be continuing to follow this story at 11 Warriors as it unfolds. So stay tuned with us at 11 Warriors, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Press Coverage.